Welcome and thanks for joining me today. My name is Jessica Vitek and I'm a professor at the University of Maryland. On behalf of my co-authors, I'll be sharing results from our ICA paper, When Does Data Collection and Use Become a Matter of Concern? A cross-cultural comparison of American and Dutch people's privacy attitudes. First, let me provide you with a quick background on the research team. This study is part of an international collaboration between the University of Maryland, Marquette University in Wisconsin, and Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Here's a shot of the full team in Milwaukee for one of our annual meetings. We were funded jointly by the NSF in the US and the NVO in the Netherlands to conduct social science research on questions related to privacy. We've been focusing on privacy concerns on mobile devices since 2016, including messaging apps, fitness trackers, and intelligent personal assistants. In this paper, we focus more broadly on cultural and contextual factors that influence people's attitudes toward data privacy. To do this, we focus the study on two research questions. First, how do trust and privacy-related attitudes toward data use vary across American and Dutch people? And second, what are the differences and similarities between Americans and Dutch in their data use concerns based on contextual factors? So why is this an important topic to study? Well, technology adoption is widespread, especially among Western nations, and data collection and analysis for surveillance and usability purposes is common. This infographic shows the amount of data generated each minute of the day by various platforms, and the amount is just simply incredible. That said, the way citizens and governments think about privacy varies significantly around the world. One prominent example of cross-cultural differences in privacy is the comparison of European and American approaches. In 2016, the European Union passed the landmark General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. This gives EU citizens more control over their data and creates new restrictions and reporting requirements for companies that collect data from citizens. These regulations differ significantly from approaches in the US, which has yet to pass federal legislation on privacy, instead relying on a mishmash of torts, sector-specific federal laws, and state laws. These differences between the US and the Netherlands are not just reflected in regulations, but also how citizens feel about privacy. Pew data suggests that in the US, citizens have little trust in the government or companies to protect their data, while in the Netherlands, there is generally greater trust in the government. Other Pew research has shown that Americans have little understanding of cybersecurity concepts or practices. While we don't have similar data about Dutch citizens, we do know that citizens believe it's both the government and individuals' responsibility to protect their data. In this study, we were guided by the work of Helen Niesenbaum, who is best known for her theoretical framework of privacy as contextual integrity. Negotiating privacy within and across networked contexts is central to the framework, which takes context as a starting point, arguing that all of our data and technological interactions occur in particular contexts, and that informational norms govern people's expectations of how personal information should flow within a given context. Our work is motivated by the nuance that a more contextual approach to privacy empowers. Through the Factorial vignette method, which I'll describe more in a moment, we seek to isolate how users might consider the appropriateness of data collection and use across multiple variables and contexts. So now let's talk about our methods. As I mentioned, we used the Factorial vignette survey method, which provides a bridge between experiments and surveys. This technique typically entails short descriptions of scenarios in which the characteristics presumed to be relevant to some outcome are systematically varied. Each vignette is followed by at least one rating task where respondents indicate their judgments. This methodology is well suited for studying nuanced social phenomena. Since changes in the vignettes are subtle, respondents are less susceptible to social desirability bias as seen in conventional surveys. In our survey, we included 5 attributes, and each attribute included between 3 to 8 levels. The format of each vignette looks like this. An actor requires some length of time of your content or information type. They plan to use this data to make an inference with the goal of the purpose of that inference. Here's a sample vignette from the survey. We used a Python script to generate all possible combinations of attributes. We then reviewed the combinations and removed nonsensical ones, like pairing your doctor as the actor with the purpose being improving traffic flow. This reduced the total number of vignettes from 6,912 to 5,232. In the survey, participants would view a vignette, then respond to 2 Likert-type items. These were, this use of my data is appropriate, and this use of my data would concern me. Each participant viewed 32 randomly assigned vignettes and responded to those 2 items for each one. Here we have more information on each of the attributes. First, we have the actor, which refers to the entity that is collecting data. Across the 6 levels, we tried to capture a wide range of potential actors where certain types of data collection are seen as more or less appropriate. Note that for the social media app, we asked participants earlier in the survey to list their most used social media app, and that name auto-filled for vignettes that included that level. The second attribute is the content or information being collected. We included 8 levels and tried to capture different formats like text versus audio, and different types like social media versus physical activity. The third attribute is the amount of data being collected, and we used 3 straightforward levels to account for a range in the quantity of data being collected. Fourth, we have the inference being drawn from the data. In recent years, we've seen AI researchers use social media and other types of data to make a wide range of inferences, and we relied on that prior research to create our list of 6 different types of inferences. Finally, we have the purpose of the inference. These data can be used for a wide range of purposes, but we focused on 8 that range from extremely serious, like fighting terrorism, to the more mundane, but likely still important, goals of improving traffic flow. We collected data in the US and the Netherlands in April 2019. For the US sample, we collected data from adult Americans on Mechanical Turk. In the Netherlands, we used the company Ipsos to collect a representative sample of Dutch adults. For this presentation, we only focus on one of our dependent variables, and this is the response to the item, "This use of data would concern me." We do this for 2 reasons. First, the 2 DVs were strongly correlated, so many of the findings are redundant. Second, the word appropriate does not have a direct translation in Dutch, so we chose to focus on data use concern to make a cross-cultural comparative analysis more robust and reliable. In addition to the vignettes, respondents also completed a number of additional questions and scales, including questions on trust, privacy, and demographics. For our first research question, we wanted to explore differences in American and Dutch respondents' attitudes toward privacy and trust. On this slide, you're seeing a series of t-tests comparing average scores for Dutch and American respondents for 5 statements about institutional trust. For the first 2 items, which focus on trust in government, we saw significantly higher values for Dutch participants, suggesting they have higher trust in their federal and local governments than Americans. The last 2 items, focusing on trust in social media and news media, show a similar pattern, with the Dutch reporting greater trust. The only non-significant item reflected trust in American companies, which dominate globally. Both American and Dutch had low trust in them. It's also important to note that the average score for American respondents was below the mean on all 5 statements. Next, we'll look at some of the privacy items included in the survey. First, we included 4 items that relate to the concept of privacy fatalism, which is commonly invoked by people who claim privacy is dead. For 3 of the 4 items, there were significant differences, with Dutch respondents consistently agreeing more with statements like, "There's nothing I can do to protect my privacy," and "I have no control over the information I share." That said, the Dutch also reported significantly more agreement with statements that reflected the concept of privacy pragmatism, that privacy was something that could be traded for convenience. Again, the scores for these items were low, all values were below the mean, suggesting that neither group was positive toward these sentiments. Moving on to the second research question, we used mixed effect modeling to account for the 2 levels of data generated from our surveys, individual level and vignette level. To simplify the findings for this presentation, however, I'm going to separate out the 2. First, when we look at individual characteristics, we find a number of significant factors in predicting the level of concern participants express toward a given vignette. Note that a positive coefficient is linked with greater data use concerns. In both groups, older respondents and those who expressed a higher level of mobile privacy concerns were more likely to consider a data use scenario concerning. Likewise, people who reported higher levels of privacy fatalism appeared to be less concerned about data use. On the other hand, education, gender, and self-efficacy were not significant in either sample. Directly comparing Dutch and American respondents, both trust and our various privacy measures were significantly different across the two samples. Now we'll look at cultural differences across the 5 vignette attributes. To do this, we conducted Bonferroni pairwise comparisons to examine differences in the level of concern. However, American respondents generally reported higher concerns across all types of vignette factors. With such differences in the threshold of judgment, we needed to go beyond a simple comparison between the absolute value of means. Therefore, we calculated the z-scores for more meaningful cross-cultural comparative analyses. This provides a way of standardizing data across a wide range of experimental conditions and allows the comparison of data independent of the original propensity. So first, when we look at responses across the 6 different levels of actor, we found the Dutch expressed lower concern and Americans greater concern when the entity collecting data was the government or law enforcement. Both samples expressed reduced concerns for doctors and social media collecting data and greater concerns for online data brokers. Next, when we look at the type of data being collected, we find similarities and differences across the samples. Dutch respondents were less concerned about the use of web browsing search history, while Americans were more concerned about it. Both Dutch and American respondents became more concerned about data use related to their text-based posts and messages, photos and video posts, phone call log data, and emails. However, the Dutch were significantly more concerned about their photos and video posts, while the Americans were more concerned about their emails. Looking at the amount of data being collected, both American and Dutch respondents expressed less concern about 1 week's worth data being collected, but more concern about 1 year's worth of data, or the full history of data being used. In comparing responses based on the inference being made from the data, we found more similarities than differences in the ways American and Dutch respondents reacted to various data inferences. The only cross-cultural difference observed was the inference of mental state. Americans felt more concerned when data was being used to infer this, while the Dutch felt less concerned. Otherwise, both American and Dutch felt more concerned when data was used to infer their sexual orientation, political views, and friend network, and less concerned when data was being used to infer where they've been and how healthy they are. Finally, when looking at the purpose of the inference, Dutch respondents were less concerned, while Americans were more concerned about data use for 2 public safety-related purposes: preventing or reducing criminal activity and fighting terrorism. The Dutch were more concerned about the purpose of reducing the spread of disease and reducing binge drinking, while Americans were less concerned. Both samples reported very little concern with using data to improve traffic flow, which led to our alternate title for this paper, Americans and Dutch Willing to Share Any Data to Improve Their Daily Commute. Now that we've taken a quick look at the findings, what does this all mean? First, as expected, we found that Dutch expressed significantly more trust in the government than Americans. Privacy is treated differently in the 2 countries, with data being more heavily regulated and privacy treated more as an inherent right in EU countries like the Netherlands. This is an important cultural difference that needs to be accounted for in comparisons between the US and EU nations. Across both our individual measures and the vignettes, American respondents reported significantly higher data privacy concerns, which is why we had to standardize our cross-cultural analyses. This difference may be in part because of the Snowden effect, referring to Edward Snowden's revelations in 2013 about mass surveillance of American citizens by the government. We identified a number of contextual factors that differ across the US and the Netherlands in their effect on privacy concerns. Many of these reflect broader cultural values, like how the Dutch have less concern about government or law enforcement collecting their data, while others require additional research. There were also many similarities between the 2 samples, suggesting that some contextual factors are more or less concerning across both cultures. When evaluating these findings through the lens of contextual integrity, it becomes clear that there are differences in the information norms for data sharing between the 2 cultures. This is partly a reflection of the way data is regulated in the 2 countries, but also speaks to wider cultural values and ways that security and privacy are framed to the citizens. When thinking about privacy policies that seek to protect citizens from inappropriate data flows, regulators must consider existing norms as well as a wide range of contextual factors that influence when a data flow is seen as inappropriate versus appropriate. In line with the GDPR, data collection by actors like those used in our Factorial vignettes should follow a policy of data minimization, only collecting data needed for a task and nothing else. This, along with greater transparency about what data is being collected, how long it will be stored, and how it will be used, will be beneficial in reducing people's privacy concerns, regardless of their nationality. So that's it. Thanks for listening to this talk, and for more information about this project, see our website at mobileprivacy.umd.edu.